Real quick, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this podcast, Greenlight.ai. We all know how important compliance is, and Greenlight.ai is the leader for compliance and EOR services, especially for talent platforms. You're going to hear about them later, but thank you to Greenlight. But Paul, listen, man, this is months in the making for you listeners out there. I forget, I think I saw you, right? And I was like, dude, we need to connect ASAP. But in general, I think our listeners, everyone, the topic of LATAM talent, but also developer talent, and also future of software development is a massive, massive, massive question in front of all of our listeners' minds right now, as well as the broad question of how do you drive product? And honestly, companies as a whole right now and whatever the hell's going on. Paul, I know you're not going to brag that much. So for you listeners out there, Paul and his full team are insanely seasoned, way smarter than me and where I went to school. But Paul, how would you describe yourself as well as the full Telescope team?
Yeah, great question. Just a lifelong learner is where I would start, right? So my preferred career, if it was possible, would just be to be a lifelong student and get paid for it. And I tried when I was younger, and unfortunately, all it did was indebt me. So, I have 2 master's degrees. I used to, just really like going to school and learning every day, doing projects. But so I still love to always learn. I spent over a decade at HubSpot, helping them to scale from about 230 people to over 5,000 people, 50 million in revenue to 2 billion in revenue. So that was a great learning experience. Every day, every year was fun. No 2 days were alike. Towards the end of my tenure, the company IPO'd, started to become more enterprise, is where I started to have a little less fun, and that's not a dig at HubSpot. It's just it's the reality of the life cycle of companies. It slows down a little. There's more stakeholders, more bureaucracy. That's part of the reason that led to me joining Telescoped. When I joined, it was only 5 people. I was number 6. We just recently hired number 7. But definitely tons of learning again, every no 2 days are alike. So lifelong learners is how I would say it. Adam and Max, the founders, I think are kind of similar. We met at Sloan, getting our MBAs, and then they went off and founded a marketing technology company, a little bit in HubSpot space, but not too close to make us direct competitors, so we can remain friendly. And we stayed in touch, and we're always trading insights and learnings from the industry. I always joked with them and flirted with them and say, hey, when are you guys going to hire me? And luckily, that moment came eventually. So you just got to be patient. Another theme I talk a lot about in these interviews and podcasts is timing and the importance of timing and patience. And so, 15 years on, we stars aligned, and I think the moment was right for us to join forces and keep learning together. And, I'll just close by saying that I incorporate this ethos into my title, right? Which I got to pick, and it was fun. We iterated on it a little bit with Adam and Max and landed on head of revenue experimentation. And everyone always asks me, like, what the heck is that? And I'm like, well, truth is, we're tiny. We're under $1 million in revenue. We're experimenting every day on a lot of things. As specifically, I experiment on go-to-market, but also on how do we want to monetize, and that's an iterative process. Like, our pricing model is not static in time, and so I think that experimentation piece speaks to who I am and how I have fun and how I like to keep learning.
I got it. Now let's dig into why Telescoped from a real lens of why the industry, why the value prop, because I think one of the coolest things is you could have done anything, Paul. Right? It was HubSpot, man. Like it wasn't like, you were in a niche industry, or it's not like you even started in staffing and are like, oh, I just can't leave this industry.
Yeah.
can do a lot of things. And I also know that you can bike over 100 miles at a time. So you could have just said, fucking been a professional biker. And that's a real bike for you listeners out there, not a motorbike. But why telescoped, Paul? And then I think we'll get into, why focus on LATAM and developers and this kind of like quasi staffing, not staffing, future of work company.
Yeah. So let me answer that in two parts, right? Like why telescoped in like, why does telescope exist? And then why did I choose telescope? Because I think they're both fun answers and they kind of go intertwined, right? So as I mentioned, Adam and Max had a first venture. This was a pre-pandemic, remote and hybrid. And as a marketing technology company, a crucial need for them was always finding developer talent. And it was hard, especially in the Boston area. Markets like New York, Boston, San Francisco, demand for dev talent always exceeds supply. And so they would run into bottlenecks expanding their teams. And so they were early adopters of different concepts of nearshoring and remote and hybrid, skinned their knees, learned the hard way how to make it work. And, when their business got acquired and they spent some time on the beach, so to speak, they started to noodle on what they wanted to do next. They knew they wanted to work together next. And so they eventually landed on like, hey, let's try and fix that problem that we ran across, because we know that a lot of other startups face the same or similar problems, right? And so that's a little bit where the nucleus of Telescope came from. I think the unfair advantage, or another key component there, or piece of the puzzle, is that Max is Costa Rican, so he had a good connections and a good network of developers in Costa Rica. And so trying to solve the problem, what they came up with was, okay, how do we, in a differentiated fashion, find quality talent for startups, usually tech startups, in a way where we kind of like resolve these pains and frictions in the supply-demand mismatch. Okay, so I'll leave that at that for now. I think the conversation will take us to, what does differentiate Telescoped and make us different. But as for me, and actually I'll go answering that now in part, is the company for several years grew, as most startups are wont to do, is passive, inbound, founder-led growth. Meaning, Adam and Max have great networks. They both studied at Sloan. They went to great undergrads. They had a positive exit as tech entrepreneurs. They have good reputation with VCs. That generates some pretty good passive pipeline, right? But it's not super scalable either. So it's enough for, as what you would call, like, quote unquote, lifestyle business. And so, they grew steadily over time, not at breakneck speed, definitely not, metrics that a VC would swoon over. But that's fine, right? Like, VC money isn't always for everybody or necessary. But eventually, what started as a human-led matching service, right, more a la traditional staffing, started to hit like exit velocity in terms of trying to like AI augment that or productize that service using AI. And so what was at first more like a vision or a dream started to become a reality, especially with the increasing improvements in performance in LLMs and other foundational models. And so when they thought that the product had reached sufficient maturity, they decided to start to want to invest in scaled outbound sales. And that's where I came into the picture. And, why Telescoped for me? Well, I spent over a decade at HubSpot building sales teams. I left HubSpot and I did fractional and consulting for including some very large companies. And one thing I noted was that no one was really using AI well at enterprise level in a meaningful fashion. And so I knew almost every org I worked for, consulted for, there was sales reps who were dabbling with AI, but that wasn't scalable. If anything, it's also like a massive like security vulnerability. And so people would talk about AI, but it was like AI sprinkling. It was nothing like really meaningful. And so here, the guys needed help scaling outbound sales. And I saw an opportunity to basically future proof myself and build a go to market stack, which was AI first or AI native. And so it was a really cool opportunity. I started with a blank slate and was able to create my own stack versus inherit a bloated or outdated stack like Salesforce and Outreach and all these tools, which are trying really hard to incorporate AI. But really, I think they're getting beat to the punch by AI first tools like Day AI, which is an AI centric CRM. Evergrowth, which is a agentic orchestration platform for enrichment and things of that nature. And so, the short answer, and sorry, I can be verbose sometimes, is I wanted to future proof myself, work with people that I liked. And in closing, what I'll say is that the industry that I'm in is globally competitive, low barrier to entry, low differentiation. It's about as hard of an industry to win in as possible. So I said, hey, if I can crack the code here using AI or an AI stack, then I'm going to be really bullish about being able to go to almost any other company and bring those skills with me and help them to leverage AI for sales success.
So let's dig into the future proofing aspect of this. So one of the angles is why LATAM, right? Like if you're going to go hire a developer, why focus on just LATAM? Why not be, when I started in 2015, 2016, I remember we used to use the tagline, hire from Silicon Valley. All right. I don't think that's happening anymore. Right? I don't think people around the world are like, oh, let me go hire the most expensive engineers in the world. But so this is one aspect, and where our listeners are always fascinated, and because our listeners, they are making strategic investments into this. This is not like they're having one hire, and then if it works, that's great. If it doesn't, whatever. Like the decisions they make today are going to impact them for the next year to 5 years, right? So getting a location right is. And when I look at LATAM, we're seeing it move. Like Randstad acquired Torque last year, mostly because of the LATAM angle of this. And you're seeing a lot of solutions. There was a LATAM, talent platform that was on Madison Square Garden or Times Square that I just saw a couple hours ago. So there's a lot of buzz going to it. But the question I have is always the why, right? And like what inputs have created that? How sustainable is it? And the analogy that I'll use is, I don't know if I told you this, Paul. I actually started in China in 2015, and I'll never forget people being like, "Ugh, China," and then you get there and you're like, "Holy shit, these people are so smart." And they were so cheap at the time, but then you start to see the ecosystem build up. The schools become incredible. Shenzhen becomes where all the hardware is, right? So I saw the ecosystem nurture, and with Latam, I haven't been there, right? So I don't know. But from y'all's perspective, why Latam?
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, I guess what I would encourage your audience, and I'm guessing I'm maybe probably preaching to the choir, is, not even just why LATAM, but like, why not go global? Okay. So we are firm believers that talent is distributed globally, but access to opportunity is not. Okay. And going back to what I mentioned before, being one of the reasons for why Telescoped exists is that mismatch of supply and demand of tech talent globally, locally in tech hubs in the U.S. Right, so in San Francisco, in New York, and in Boston, and so really the first thing that we're trying to solve is or an analogy that I like to use is there's a lot of tech companies that are fishing in the same holes, in the same ponds, right? And it's overcrowded and they're overfishing and you're running out of fish and they're really hard to find. And we hear stories all the time of companies spending months to find, really good talent. They give them an offer, and then like a week before they're supposed to start, they're like, hey, I'm really sorry, but these other guys down the street are offering me 25% more, so I'm going with them. And a lot of small startups get basically priced out of the market by bigger startups that are more well-funded. And so, and that applies everywhere, right? Like there's great talent in Africa and in Asia and in Europe and all over the place, right? Why LATAM? Well, I think LATAM does have some nuances which make it more attractive than any of those other places that I just mentioned, right? And so there's a few, right? So in Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Costa Rica, there's actually like pretty high levels of English fluency. Time zone alignment is not an issue. So I've run into that before as well. I was a fractional CRO for an Irish tech company. And even just those few, 4 or 5 hours of difference between the folks that we had over in Dublin and the folks that we had here in the US made it a little bit tricky for meetings, especially, we had some of our team was West Coast in Cali. Some of us were East Coast. I'm Boston based. And then we had some of the team in Dublin, and it was tricky, not gonna lie. Right. So that time zone alignment helps a lot. There's really good quality down there. And what happens with remote talent, no matter where it's from, is that American organizations or hiring managers or leaders don't have an ability to de-risk that talent. So like if you're hiring engineers from the US and they went to Harvard or Stanford or whatnot, like, those are great places, you really have to be a smart individual to have gone to one of those schools. And then if you worked at like Klaviyo or ActiveCampaign or HubSpot, and I'm just sticking to MarTech, it's a space that I know, those companies are great and they create great engineers, and you don't keep a job there for long if you don't produce, right? But now what happens if someone goes to like EAFIT, which is like, one of the best engineering schools in Latin America down in Colombia. And then they go and they work at like Quinto Andar, which is an awesome tech company out of Brazil. Like those are brands and companies and schools that you don't know. And so you don't know how to use those signals to de-risk the profiles when you're generating your pipeline. And so again, we're trying to bridge those markets, de-risk for the hiring managers or entities, and give opportunities to these engineers in LATAM, which, working for an awesome top level tech company in LATAM is not the same as working for a great VC funded, company here in the States. And then, once you work at that company in the US and you do well, now future hirers, it's not as hard for them to de-risk that hiring opportunity, and it changes your trajectory forever. And now it's much easier for those individuals to stay employed with other tech companies in the US. And so sorry, I strayed a little bit up from your original question, why LATAM, but English fluency, time zone alignment, great talent that people just don't know about. And the last component, which is also really, really important, and I think sometimes undervalued, is like cultural affinity or attuneness, where, I have worked with teams from Southeast Asia and other parts of the world, and super nice people, but culturally it's not as easy to integrate or as fluid. And there's a lot of loyalty in LATAM. So I have a couple of great stories where we've had engineers at clients of ours that were facing cash flow issues, and they proactively and voluntarily offered to take temporary pay cuts or to I forget the nomenclature, but like pause their payments, for 3-4 months until like a future funding round was secured, and then retroactively get paid, those salaries, like really going out of their ways to try and keep the company humming despite the cash flow difficulties. and our clients were blown away. They were like, holy cow, like I can't believe that, Joe came to me to offer, a temporary, 3-month reduction in pay so that we can keep the lights on, or that, Jane came to us saying like, hey man, we can withhold her payments for a quarter and then pay her after this next funding round. Like it was so amazing. We never anticipated that level of like loyalty, and I would say that's less uncommon than people would realize or expect.
Hey everyone, real quick, I want to talk about the risk that is involved with an independent workforce. No matter where you are, whether it's the US, whether it's Brazil, whether it's the EU, whether it's London, there is risk in how you classify and how you work with individuals. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just paying someone. The classification, the actual collaboration, the contracts, the payments, everything is intertwined and must be connected in a way that doesn't get you in trouble with the tax authorities, regulatory authorities, and even potentially class action lawsuits. There are numerous examples of this. Just search classification lawsuit on wherever you want to use, and you'll get plenty. Which is why today's sponsor, Greenlight.ai, is the modern EOR, modern compliance solution for the modern workforce. There's 4 things that we want to call out when hiring an independent worker that you need. And that is, you need to onboard, you need to classify, you need to send payments, and you need to manage this global workforce. It's more than just one person, and Greenlight has all of that covered. All right, I want you to head over to greenlight.ai and tell them Human Cloud sent you. I've heard that a couple times now, especially on the loyalty side. I wonder when we look at, so now like double clicking on LATAM and trying to go from this massive just generalization, right? And be like, it's kind of like saying, oh yeah, America is this, right? When it's like, well, okay, not really, right? You can't blanket. But so where are the areas? Because you mentioned your co-founder being Costa Rican, right? Are there hotspots? For example, is it Sao Paulo? Is it Rio? Is it Mexico City? Where are some of the hotspots?
There are, and there's nuance, right? So like Costa Rica is a hotspot. There's a big expat community there, US, Canadian, European. So there's pretty high English fluency and cultural affinity or alignment with the US. Mexico, mostly due to geographic proximity. So especially cities in the north, like Monterrey, Guadalajara is not so north, but still like those are 2 like tech hubs. But Mexico, again, just in general, that proximity to the US. Argentina, Buenos Aires, doesn't have to do with proximity, but it's just like culturally, it's one of those countries where they over-index on like English fluency, and they've historically had a really, really, really good education system. Education is free for everyone in the country, and even for a lot of other nationals outside of Argentina, but are from LATAM, to the point that it's kind of gotten abused and their education systems is overwhelmed and kind of not as good as it used to be, but historically really good. Brazil is very tech forward. I think people talk about there being like a tech lag between the US and LATAM of a few years. Brazil has the least lag, I would say. Again, they're very technically fluent and tech forward. Mexico, I would say, and Colombia as well has just invested a lot since the 80s to recuperate the country and also their perception globally, after a lot of bad stuff historically with Escobar and things like that. And they're trying to put that image behind. And so there's been a lot of investment in the country there for many, many decades. So they have a really good education there. They index a little bit lower on English fluency than say like Costa Rica or Argentina or Mexico. But still you can get some really great talent there. So, every country has its nuances, just like you said, right? Like someone from Cali versus Texas versus Florida versus New York, little bit different vibe and cultures. Same thing in LATAM, right? So it kind of also depends on what your org is looking for. You might want to diversify a little bit, like where you want to focus on talent from different areas.
Which let me also ask you, what are some of the like expected problems and expected things that will happen if you don't understand this? And so I'll give one quick example where if I had just known, then it would have gone over smooth. But so I think so I went to grad school at Babson, right? So we had a lot of LATAM classmates. Now, for about a month, they were showing up 10 minutes late. And, us Americans were pretty pissed off and didn't like, but it didn't bring it up to them or anything. But internally, it'd be like, what the fuck? Like, why do they keep showing up late? So then finally, we kind of broke and we were like, enough. Like, why are you always late? And then they turned to us and they're like, what do you mean? We're right on time. And we're like, what? So like, to me, that's the one I always use. Right. And then I met my wife in Miami. So that also living in Miami, talk about a lot of cultural there as well. But what do you see as being the American executive team or the Americans? What are some of these common things that you're like, we always run into this?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. We at HubSpot, most of my tenure there, I was growing the LATAM organization, and so it was something we would always joke about because it would happen with prospects as well. Like in Latin America, if you show up 5-10 minutes after the agreed upon start time of the meeting, it was actually like culturally acceptable and considered being on time. I think that happens less with engineers. I think engineers are a little bit more structured and rigid. But no, the biggest single thing that I faced that exists today, even, and is not going to change anytime soon, it's going to take more time and more generations, is LATAM is historically very patriarchal, very hierarchical. And so people are less likely to proactively suggest ideas or concepts that could be perceived to ruffle feathers or go against the grain or to provide like upward coaching or suggestions, right? So they're used to very much like, hey, the boss dictates the strategy or the boss says what to do, but you never give suggestions to the boss or feedback to the boss, right? Like that's very cultural. I face that very strongly in LATAM because when you do more upmarket selling, you often want to find champions and coach champions who can sell for you internally. And so I still very vividly remember one time I had a champion who wanted HubSpot, and I was trying to coach her to, educate her boss on like the fallacy of their existing, tech strategy. And she was like, I can never do that. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, I can't tell my boss what to do, or I can't tell him that, our Salesforce instant is like bloated and massively inefficient. And I was like, it was like, oof, for me, I was like, holy cow, like, and so there's a lot of that. And so I think there has to be a lot of space for creating trust and establishing psychological safety, and really reiterating to the talent that you hire abroad that it's okay for them to bring ideas to the table, that that's actually part of what you want and expect from them is to, spot your blind spots, and to collaborate on an even playing field. Because I think, there's a double whammy there of that cultural ethos of things being very, hierarchical, and you don't stray out of your lane and you don't give upward feedback, versus a lot of orgs that we work with are flat and they want to be agile. And so you kind of got to marry that. And second is, and this we focus on a lot as well, is that, we tell our clients that the talent that we are providing them should be treated as a full-time employee as anybody else, and what we're doing on our side is, taking care of their benefits and payroll and all that stuff, but like don't treat them like a contractor. But still sometimes there's that, unspoken like feeling of like, hey, am I really part of the team? Am I just a contractor? And so we always coach our customers to embrace them and bring them in and treat them the same as everybody else. And we give our engineers coaching as well. So once we place an engineer, we don't just, pop out. We stay we onboard the engineer for the course of a month to make sure they integrate well culturally with the client. And this is one of those areas that we focus on.
It's funny. It's such like simple things that we complicate so much in terms of like, hey, okay, there's going to be some cultural norms, just like talk and work it out, right? Like, hey, you were 5 minutes late 2 times in a row. Why? Right? And then, oh, okay, well, listen, our culture here don't do it. Most likely, then okay, they'll show up on time.
Yeah.
But coming back to that premise of okay, like they're not just a contractor. I think one thing that to me is different about flexible talent in terms of like in terms of our world is the idea of like contractor not contractor. That just is so foreign to me because I mean I started technically as a contractor, but it wasn't in that way, right? It wasn't like a temp to hire situation or like a contingent or whatever all the various terms are. It was always just like, hey, this is based off impact and outcomes. And probably just like when you were hired at HubSpot, it was like, all right, I'm going to come in and do this. And if I don't, then I'm going to get fired. Doesn't matter if I'm full time or a contractor, right? Like, if I produce, I stay. If I don't, I don't. But so it's refreshing, in some ways to hear like just don't treat them like a contractor. I think when looking at like telescopes and part of what you guys are doing, it's like, okay, yeah, like why complicate it? Like why try to make this massive AI platform that does all the sourcing and all the work for you? Like, no, you still need developers. And like LATAM has really good developers. Time zone's great. Price is great. So um, what would you say, Paul, as we kind of come to the close of all right, like deeply understanding LATAM, like what are the ingredients for a successful product team? And because I think this also hits on probably why you structured Telescope the way you structured it, right? Like I think I'm assuming that when a customer comes to you, you don't just say, here's a million developers, hire the one you want. I'm assuming you actually talk to them and have to explain the methodology and the strategy and why you know if they're good and not. Um, but your lucrative background as well as your whole team's, what makes a good product team? And I'm intentionally keeping it a little open ended because I don't want to bias you with my own.
No, yeah. So I love this question, and it's not always like easy to describe or to respond either, though. I think so. So when I think building a team transcends almost the industry or the function. I think that some of the core elements of building a great team are very similar between, say, a soccer team or a sales team or a dev team. And when I was building sales teams at HubSpot, it was one of my favorite activities to do or responsibilities of the role. And a big part of what I focused on was like the sum being greater, or sorry, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, right? So, meaning, I wanted a team where like 1 + 1 could equal 3, and that didn't always mean getting all stars across the board, right? Like, an all-star striker and an all-star goalie and an all-star, defender. It was getting a team that could gel together, create psychological safety, trust one another, was diverse in thought and lived experiences, to be able to get the best out of them. And sometimes it also meant nurturing talent and recruiting talent over months or years and being patient on the timing for when I could try to incorporate them into the team. And so what we see at Telescope is that sometimes a developer's resume doesn't give you the whole picture. And you can't just build a team based on what resumes or GitHub profiles or LinkedIn profiles look like. And you have to spend some time trying to suss out the intangibles that the person brings to the table. And that's actually core to our product offering, right? So the way that we determine quality isn't by having our engineers go through a million certifications and basically put them through, an obstacle course or a gauntlet and see who can survive, at the end, all like bloodied and banged up, which unfortunately I think a lot of other players in this space do. And not just on the development side, but also on the sales side, right? So a company I won't name, in my time between HubSpot and Telescoped, I considered joining another big player in this space, and the recruiting process was just awful on the sales side. And I can't imagine what it was like on the developer side, right? And then when you check them out on Glassdoor, they had a ton of really bad reviews on the dev side, right? So for us, what we do is that ours is an invite-only community of engineers. And to begin the certification process, you need to be referred by 3 other engineers who've worked with you before. So it can't be like a friend or a cousin or a manager of another team that you collaborated with, or like it has to be someone who like saw your work. And what happens is that, engineers are very, what do you call it? Like proud and like they don't give recommendations like easily. Like they don't want to dilute their brand. They're not going to go out and vouch for someone they like if they're a crappy engineer, right? And so like the community knows like who the badasses are, who just crush it, but also go out of their way to like up level their peers, and add value in other ways. And so that comes out in the nodes and edges graph model that we constructed. So it's called TrustRank, and it's Google's PageRank, which is basically that the more referrals you get, the bigger your node grows, because you have more lines going into that node. And so, and also like a referral is not a referral, right? Like if I get a referral from like Steve Jobs, that's worth way more than like a referral from an entry level, intern at Acme Corp. And so we found this to be a much more reliable way to find the quality talent in the community. And that goes back to the intangibles, right? So sometimes we even have to coach our clients when we give them matches. And yeah, like you said before, we don't give them a million matches. Like we use our algorithms to ingest their job post, crawl our base of engineers, and then we give them a curated list of like 2, maybe 3. I think the biggest list I've ever seen we provided was like 5 engineers. And then we always have to coach them and say, hey man, you might not be wowed by these resumes, but trust me, based on these very niche quality signals that no one else has, that we have, and you filter out all the noise, these people are great matches for what you need, right? So kind of going back to your question, I think, the keys to the kingdom are those intangibles, and spending some time on being strategic and building your team. And lastly, what I would say, and I think this kind of goes across all teams, whether it's sports or sales or engineering, is you want to find people who up level everyone else around them, right? And so I think that's, if you look at like Michael Jordan, like, yeah, he was an amazing player, and yeah, he ruffled some feathers, and he wasn't everyone's cup of tea. But I think it's undeniable that he would raise the level of everyone that was on the floor with him, at that time. That's what you want to look for when you're building your team.
Yeah. I just want to make sure I double click and highlight for our listeners, like the invite only. I think there's this also really weird thing right now where the traditional channels are just saturated, man. Like the fact that you're forcing people to go through all this work to get a job when there are incredible people that have already been vetted by somebody else. So why, like, it just makes no sense. And even hearing you discuss all of the like talent sourcing technology that you are building, like why, if unless you're an AI company or a sourcing company, why would you do that? I always crack up with a lot of our clients where they're like, oh, we need to have this, we're going to build. I'm like, why? Like if someone else is going to, it's not core to your business. Why would you do that? But
I mean, if I can just add on to that, right? Like one thing about building teams or nurturing talent, and actually it's just top of mind because there's a few threads on LinkedIn that I participated on this week on like this notion of like will versus skill, right? A highly will engineer and someone who has a lot of like inherent talent doesn't need to come to the table with a super high level of skill and a specific tech stack that you require or you're utilizing for your project or your product, right? That stuff is easily trainable, right? And just to speak in generalities, I can have a badass Ruby engineer, but maybe I need someone who's good in Python. Like, dude, if this person is a badass, like teaching them Python is not going to be hard because they have a high level of talent and a high level of will, right? And that's like that quality signal that we're trying to intuit on and surface in our community, because languages, like, those are teachable, and so much of it translates, right? And so, yeah, that's another thing we're always like telling our clients is the will component is indispensable, right? Like, teaching them a particular language is not hard, or your industry, or like, we lost a client once, which was super silly. They were like adamant that this person needed to have like fintech experience. I was like, dude, like, you're having them build a product, and from a certain perspective at the engineering level, it doesn't matter if it's fintech or martech. Like, if the person has a high level of will, a high level of latent talent, you can teach them the particular tools of a fintech product, right? Like, it's not a must-have criteria in my opinion, right? So just wanted to add that to where we were going with the conversation, as something that we look for when we build teams. And that's what we're trying to provide people as a service, as a product, is we find that quality signal that we can provide to you as a way of vetting someone who's going to be very capable to join your team. Or another way of looking at it, and then I'll shut up, is when I hire, and I translate this to my clients today, is obviously you always have to try to find like the gap between, the skill level that the role requires and where the person is. But I wouldn't always hire the person with the smallest gap. I would hire the person whom I thought had the best ability to climb that learning curve and reduce the gap in a minimum amount of time, right? Because you can find someone whose gap is this, but to close it's going to take a year, and someone who has a gap that's this, but they can close it in 3 months, right? Like, that's the person you want to find, because they have that will and that latent talent.
I love it. I'm going to rebrand you guys as Signal as a Service. If we want to get really, listen, if you guys make a shit ton of money on that language, then I will definitely come back and be like, Paul, where's my 10%? But listen,
Gladly.
It was a blast to have you, Paul. Most important question: where can our listeners find you and Telescope?
LinkedIn is the best place to find us. My co-founder or the co-founder of my company, Max Feinzeit, is very prolific on LinkedIn. Adam and I, not so much, but I don't really do the X thing so much. So you can just go to telescope.com or find us on LinkedIn.
I love it. Paul, thank you for hopping on, my friend.
Thanks for having me, man.